This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Today on CityCast Boise, Christian nationalism is gaining momentum in Idaho, with some lawmakers aiming to make the Bible required reading in public schools. But does this movement reflect the teachings of Jesus, or is it alienating the communities it claims to represent? We're diving into the impact of this ideology and whether differing beliefs can still thrive in our state. It's Monday, January 13th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Today, I'm talking with Ben Kramer. He's a pastor and writer in the Treasure Valley. Thanks so much for being here, Ben.
So good to be here with you, Lindsay.
You've written quite a bit about your concerns with Christian nationalism. So I really just want to jump in. What is your main concern about it?
My main concern about Christian nationalism is that it has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus.
That's maybe not what I was expecting. Can you explain a little more what you mean by that? Or, because they talk about Jesus a lot. So
do they though? Like I feel like it's mostly the Old Testament and a lot of passages that they love to cherry pick out of the Bible to enforce their cultural, ethnic, gender, and socioeconomic agenda. So Jesus gets trotted out as this kind of mascot for their political agenda rather than an actual person that they are following to model their lives by.
And so based on all of that, you talked about, their agenda. What is their agenda that they maybe use their idea of Jesus for as a poster child? What agenda is it that they're pushing in your perspective?
Just like with any movement, there's many variants or degrees. So I heard a biblical scholar put it one way, that there's like Christian nationalism light, where maybe our grandparents or parents, they put, God bless America bumper stickers on their car. And they deeply believe that America was founded on Christian values. So that's like Christian light, right?
Okay, yeah.
The more extreme factions of Christian nationalism is like what we saw happen on January 6th, where we saw Bibles and crosses and Christian flags being carried into the Capitol to overthrow the democratic process of an election in our country for the sake of a theocratic control, to establish a theocracy where the Bible dictates every law of our country, and really has Christian supremacy over all of the laws and every sector of society. So you hear in one of the more extreme factions of Christian nationalism, you hear the 7 mountains of society talked about, like education, media, government, family, and they really do want God or their version of Christianity to rule over all those segments of society, because they deeply believe that if they don't, then they will be in violation of their religion, and they want the world to be in conformity to that so that Christ will return.
Well, and that's something that I don't know that everybody knows about. And I know you've written about this a lot, and I want to get into some of the things that you've written, that this isn't just about like laws at the state house or what people do at the Capitol.
Right.
Like the idea when you bring up, they want to have their religion be in charge of how families are, how people are living their lives, like social structures. It's not just about government. And I think people miss that sometimes.
I think one of the more accurate phrases you hear is culture war, because it is a culture that they are trying to impose that dictates culture for everyone else. This is the kind of culture that everyone has to abide by. And it's a very white Christian view, patriarchal view of their religious perspective of the world.
And in a recent op-ed you wrote in the Idaho Statesman, you emphasize the importance of the separation of church and state. Mm-hmm. And a lot more vocal Christians or Christian nationalists in online spaces usually have a very different message, saying something along the lines of, separation of church and state isn't in the Constitution. It was just part of a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote. Why, as a Christian pastor, are you advocating for the separation of church and state?
Gosh, there's so many reasons. But just to name a few of them, one, just historically, like, who were the founding fathers moving away from? Why was there so many people fleeing religious persecution, which is the common narrative of the founding of our country? They were fleeing religious persecution. But who was the persecutor? It was the Church of England. It was a Christian nation in Britain that was leading to persecution of not just other religious groups, but other Christian groups that they were really upset with. Because, if we know Christian history well, we know that we've always gotten along, and Christianity has always just been so nonviolent, right? And no, like, as soon as the church has crawled into bed with the government, Constantine being probably the first historical record of that, when he made Christianity the official religion of Rome, you see this ongoing trend of violence, of greed. But the founding fathers were fleeing religious persecution from a Christian nation, and their intent was a government free from religious control that helped to propagate religious freedom. So there was various sects of Christianity, from Congregationalists to Presbyterians, Quakers, and non-religious folks like Benjamin Franklin, who signed the Declaration of Independence, right? And so you have this conglomeration of various religious perspectives that shaped the founding of our country. And my other reason for advocating this is that, again, you can't study church history for any length of time without seeing the problems that come up with when the church has crawled into bed with the empire. The church loses its distinctive characteristic, again, as this embodied witness of who Jesus was in the world, and becomes like Caesar, using power to enforce dominion over the world rather than bringing power and sharing that for and with people, exclusively the poor, the marginalized, and the victimized in the world.
And I think you'll agree with me about this, that Christian nationalism isn't this nebulous idea that, like, maybe in the future it will be here. I feel like it's here. We're already seeing it. We're already contending with it. So what are some of the effects of Christian nationalism that you're seeing in Idaho right now that encouraged you to write that op-ed?
The intention to want the Bible read before class every day in our public school system. And not just the Bible, the King James Version of the Bible, with any scholar worth their salt knows is the worst English translation of the Bible. It's the first, so it's the worst. So like this proposed bill to have the Bible read in public schools was what really sparked me to write that.
Ben, are you saying the these, thous, thines doesn't make it more holy and official? Because that's what I was taught growing up.
If that's what really gets you, like, then by all means, let that be your devotional. But like, there are more accurate English translations out there.
Well, and just to clarify for anyone who might be listening who's not aware, the Idaho Family Policy Center is a local lobbying group, and they're the ones that are bringing the bill that Ben mentioned that would require teachers in every classroom, so public school classrooms, not like a private Christian school, but public school classrooms, to read these 20 Bible verses to students every day. And Blaine Kanzati has said that he's part of the Idaho Family Policy Center. He said that this would expose children to the entire Bible by the time they graduate from high school. As a pastor, what do you think about this goal, or particularly this goal in the classroom?
Well, one, exposing kids to the Bible, like that's already possible through our libraries. Like, the Bible's accessible to anyone, and through humanities courses and other things that are already offered in our public school system. They already get an introduction to Christianity. Doesn't sound to me like an exposure to the Bible is really the goal. It's exposure to the Bible in the way that they are demanding, right? Mm-hmm. I've been in Christian nationalist circles long enough to know that if any other religious group demanded this, to have the Quran read 20 verses of the Quran read before every classroom, they would literally lose their minds.
Oh, even the Book of Mormon.
Even the Book of Mormon, right? Yeah. An American homegrown religion, like that still would make them lose their minds and call this religious oppression. So it's deeply hypocritical to want this done in the name of Christianity for a goal that's vaguely defined at best and with no questions allowed. Yeah. So it's like you don't want them thinking in the classroom. And not to mention the other hypocritical side of this, do you want the Bible to be taught and instructed? Because as a pastor, I have spent in my entire career being trained to teach the Bible effectively. You're just wanting it read, not taught, right? This ancient text, you just want read and shouted in a room and no questions allowed. What kind of exposure are you talking about? And if you want the whole Bible, let me tell you all the scandalous pornographic material that we have also had copious amounts of conversations about banning other books because of the same. And like, go read Ezekiel and just tell me how pornographic that book gets, or the Song of Solomon's, or there's just so much wrong with this stance that's vaguely put together that it's a misuse of the Bible and the misuse of our public school systems for a personal agenda.
Well, and I also think it's very interesting that this would be mandatory. This would be at the start of the school day for every student.
Yeah.
But at least the school district that my children go to, things like learning about puberty are an opt-in. It's not mandatory. I have to choose as a parent to opt my children into that. Yeah. So they would be mandated to have Bible verses every day, but might not learn about their growing body. And that makes me question, like, what are we doing?
Right. That's the thing that comes up every time. It's like, what does Christian nationalism want? Does it want parents' rights? Which has been a huge talking point. Like we demand educational freedom. We demand parents' rights. But we're also going to demand that the Bible be read to everyone without any parental consent or opt-out, right? So it's like the hypocrisy is just, they don't even care anymore. Like the hypocrisy has just become part of their modus operandi, like the way that they operate in politics in our country.
So, Ben, I'm really curious. Do you feel like legislators, the session has started up now, do you think that they are listening to Idahoans' voices, Christian Idahoans' voices, or are they really focused on a certain kind of Christian messaging, or certain kind of Christians have sway over the legislators?
Sure. I think that's a really important question. And I'll tell you my personal experience that I believed on the outside looking in that it felt like the loudest voices were from further right Christian perspectives. But then I was invited by a few people, Republican legislators, to come and just speak with them. And I came to pray with them before the legislative session began and really asked, like, why was I there? And they said, we don't know how to talk to our far right colleagues. And so I would say that while the loudest voices and the ones that organize the most do tend to gravitate towards the far right Christian perspective, there are conservatives and moderates who are also feeling just as whiplash and shock that many of us who don't associate with those movements are feeling as well. And they're trying to grapple from within the movement too, which can often be harder when you're within the movement, but you're seen as a rhino, like a Republican name or a Chino or a Christian in name only. And like you get probably some of the most hostile feedback because like you're supposed to be one of us, but they're opposing the movement from within.
And do you think that this rise in Christian nationalism, where they're maybe the loudest voices or have really effectively organized to make sure that their messaging is very prolific, do you think that that is affecting the reputation of Christianity in Idaho?
Absolutely. A little historical side note, like this movement has different iterations all throughout the United States. I mean, we see far right Christianity in the Ku Klux Klan. We see far right Christianity in Christian identity, which is what led to the founding of the Aryan nations in northern Idaho. There hasn't been a person that I've encountered outside of the church who hasn't either gained a negative perspective of Christianity or has themselves been hurt or really demonized by people who claim to be Christians. And so the reputation of Christianity has taken so much of a hit in the last 10 plus years because of this continuing growing insurgence.
Yeah, no, I definitely, just speaking for myself, I know when I'm having a conversation, if somebody does lead with something religious, something very Christian, I have a moment where I'm like, okay, wait, I'm going to let you continue, but I'm a little like, it just like triggers this like, oh, I don't know where this is going to go. So,
well, I'm a pastor, Lindsay, and I feel the same way. So
yeah, and it makes me sad because I don't want to just make that assumption because I've been very wrong. Yeah. I've been very wrong where someone leads with that, and then I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. That was really judgmental of me to start off with. But it has like, there are these implications in the past, especially in the past few years, when somebody leads with a very like overtly religious or overtly Christian message where I'm like, ooh, what's your agenda? Why are you doing that? Like it is just immediately I'm a little suspicious. And so that, I wish it wasn't that way.
Yeah. I know that a lot of people in my circles have taken to calling themselves, like if it comes up in a conversation, like their desire is for people to be loved by their words, thoughts, and deeds. And so like that's what they want them to encounter. And then later on, they'll discover their religious affiliation, right? That I'm a Christian. You're seeing that within Christian movements as well to try to distance themselves from this very public, harmful reputation that we're seeing.
And why do you think that this form of Christianity, this Christian nationalism that really doesn't care about separation of church and state, that wants this theocracy, that wants dominion, that wants this kind of total control, why do you think it has such a grip on Idaho right now?
It has tapped into all of the degrees of Christian nationalism, right? Like even those who are Christian nationalism light, like they're not like we need to take over America for Christianity, but they have also felt marginalized from any other political expression. I also think it's deeply rooted in Idaho culture. So much of Christian extremism has spawned here. Like Christian identity, for example, came up from California, founded the Aryan nations, and had an explosive amount of numbers here in Idaho, like the desire to do Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana as this like white settlement, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, like the redoubt for...
Exactly. Yeah. Like that was a long thought out plan from the Aryan nations that was spawned there to have a Christian white settlement. So I think all of those things kind of come together to culminate to this popular conception of what Christian nationalism is as this movement that's going to save both Christianity and our country.
And are you having any conversations about this with other local religious leaders who might not be Christian or might be a different type of Christian? And if so, what kind of conversations are you having?
Yeah, I'm currently with the United Methodist Church. And so a lot of pastors within that denomination are more closely aligned with how I think and how I see my faith and want it to be lived out in our world. But with the Jewish and Islamic faith leaders and people of other faith, they are just as concerned as I am because they would be among the marginalized groups. And I would count like Methodism, we would be one of those minority religious groups that would not be counted as fully Christian according to Christian nationalism, right?
Yeah, I would add Mormons or the LDS faith. And so when I see, there's a lot of things the Christian nationalists say against that religion. And then when I see the legislators who are LDS or Mormon voting with the Christian nationalists, I'm like,
right?
They don't view you as Christian. You know that, right? Like, what's your end game here?
Yeah,
because they don't see you as them. They see you as With Christian nationalism seeming to have a very prolific upswing in Idaho right now, how can people push back on this? Or what are things that people can do if they are concerned about it or alarmed or want to get involved? What is effective?
Yeah, I'd say maybe put it in two categories, an internal and then an external. Internally, I think it may be difficult to want to even look at the Bible, but really like arming yourself with understanding what the Bible actually says is one of the best ways to then oppose on their own turf. Like being more educated in the Bible and say, that's not actually what it says at school board meetings or wherever you're showing up and Christian nationalist rhetoric the Bible is being touted in their camp, to be able to respond and say, yeah, but you just took that verse out of context. This is actually what the original language says. That usually stumps the conversation. And then secondly, we need to learn from their playbook. They are organized, they are funded, they gain support, and they are tireless in trying to gain that momentum and support. The reason why we are seeing such an upsurge is because they've been working since the founding of the moral majority for 50 plus years. They got Reagan elected, right? Mm-hmm. This isn't a brand new movement. They have been organizing and networking for much, much longer than any opposition. And so we need to learn from that playbook and run for local office, show up to school board meetings, get organized so that we can have a contingent that says this is not the only voice in Idaho. Like we also want to represent people who are not part of that Christian nationalist movement.
And I'm really curious for maybe anyone who is interested in having some Bible verses in their back pocket, what are some passages that people could have at the ready that push back on this idea of Christian nationalism?
Studying the Bible more, the more I studied the Bible, the more I realized that like the whole from Genesis to Revelation, it is this struggle over what power means and how it should be displayed in the world. So I think the entire Bible really is in opposition to what Christian nationalism is claiming. But some of the key parts of the Bible, all throughout Jesus' ministry, his harshest words were not against outsiders or sinners. His harshest words were against those who use their religion as a tool of oppression and self-serving power. I think this is one of the most underrated passages that literally gives Jesus' definition of power. Let me read just a few verses to you. Jesus knew that God had put all things under his power. Can't get clearer than that. He knew God had given him all power and that he had come from God and was returning back to God. He is God's son. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothes, wrapped a towel around his waist, and after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet. Can you imagine any of the leaders that Christian nationalism upholds getting down on their knees and washing people's feet?
No, absolutely not. No.
No. So no, it is a posture of humility, self-sacrificial love. That is how Jesus defines power, right? Right there in John chapter 13, verses 3-5, I think is one of the best ones. This is why Jesus was so misunderstood, because the Messiah was supposed to come and conquer Rome and make Israel great again. Like that's what they were expecting in that time. And so then you have this guy show up preaching nonviolence, riding into Jerusalem on a donkey instead of a war horse. Like you're not armed militia, you're calling fishermen and women and children, and you're gathering everybody together and saying, hey, we should serve the poor and sell all of our possessions and help everyone, right? And like, oh, that'll really get you killed when you're messing with the status quo of power and wealth. But Peter really believed that Jesus was supposed to be this military Messiah all throughout his ministry. And Jesus says, that is not what I have come to do. So there again, Jesus is opposing this nationalistic fervor even in his own time. And we should do the same in our own religious groups.
Thank you so much, Ben. Those are some really powerful Uno reverse cards for people who need a little something when these conversations come up. And thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to break down your perspective and give us your expertise as a pastor when it comes to this rising Christian nationalism. Thank you.
Yeah, it was such an honor to be here. I know that part of my job is preaching, and so hopefully I didn't preach too much and we conversed more, but it was just such an honor to be here.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, you should tell a friend about us so they'll have a heads up about the growing Christian nationalism in Idaho too. We'll be back tomorrow morning with our winter bucket list. Catch you then.